was early Monday evening, October 16th, 1944, when Darcy Llewellyn heard the knock on his door in his Columbus, Indiana home. He opened the door, and the uniformed messenger boy handed him a Western Union telegram. He asked for a signature, and then he rushed away. The telegram in the envelope was from the War Department, and it said, Darcy's daughter, Jeanne, a member of the Women's Airforce Service Pilots, the Wasp, was dead. Almost exactly 6 months after her graduation from Wasp training in Sweetwater, Texas, Jeanne was flying as an engineering test pilot at Shaw Army Airfield in South Carolina. Now, this airfield was basically a flight training center for the U.S. Army Air Corps, where male cadets were being taught to fly military aircraft. Jeanne's job was to analyze aircraft performance complaints and write reports for the maintenance department. Now, frequently, she would take those repaired airplanes into the air to determine if everything was now in working order and were they safe for cadets and Army instructors to fly. Late that October afternoon, just a month before her 32nd birthday, Jeanne and fellow Wasp, Maybelle Lyell, flipped a coin to see which of the two planes that were on the field the women would fly. Jeanne won the toss and chose a BT-13 aircraft that had just been repaired and released by the maintenance mechanics for testing. The previous pilot of that plane had complained that the plane had a heavy wing that rolled the plane slightly to the left and sometimes to the right. Well, for 14 miles, everything seemed fine with the aircraft, until it wasn't. The daughter of divorced parents, Jeanne was born in Columbus, Indiana, and attended Columbus High School, where she quickly made an impression on her teachers and on her fellow students, too. She was junior and senior class secretary, senior yearbook editor, a member of the Honor Society, and already becoming a leader. She even took a couple of flying lessons while she was in high school. Her high school yearbook said that she was, among other things, popular, charming, editor, and May Queen, and a dancer of note. That is our fair Jeanne. She wasn't afraid, said a school friend. She wasn't afraid to do things that others of us were almost always too shy to do. After graduation in 1929, Jeanne chose to head west and attend Washington State College in Pullman, Washington. There, she resumed her flying lessons and obtained her pilot license. While studying at State, Jeanne met Edward Norbeck, who was finishing his degree. Edward was hired as manager of the Mason City Hospital. Now, that hospital was set up by the contractors who were building the Grand Coulee Dam across the Columbia River in Washington. Edward got Jeanne hired as a receptionist and secretary to the chief surgeon at that hospital, a position she would hold for over 4 years after her 1933 graduation. On April 13, 1938, Edward boarded the passenger liner Aranji for what was supposed to be a 6-day vacation cruise to Hawaii. 2 months later, when Jeanne came to visit him, Edward had already decided he was staying in the islands. He had accepted a position as a manager at the Libby McNeil and Libby Pineapple Plantation, just northwest of Honolulu. Jeanne returned to Mason City Hospital, and she continued to correspond with Edward. During the summer of 1940, Jeanne returned to her Indiana home for a visit with her family and to tell her father that she and Edward Norbeck were going to get married. She left for Honolulu, and in late September, Edward in a white 3-button, double-breasted suit, and Jeanne in a very simple bridal gown, said their vows together. Now, they lived about 8 miles from the Pearl Harbor Naval Base, and had a dangerous front row seat to the Japanese attack on December 7th of 1941. For most of the next year and a half, both served as air raid wardens and suffered through food shortages, nighttime curfews, and martial law. Now, of course, they wanted to return to the mainland, but the U.S. government was worried about a potential attack on the Pacific coast. Finally, they were allowed to leave. Back in the States in March 1943, Edward enlisted and served in the Army Intelligence Service. Jeanne returned to her family in Columbus. There she wanted to help in the war effort and applied for the Women's Airforce Service Pilots training program. Well, she needed more flight time to qualify, so she took the train to Dallas, where she took additional flying lessons, and with just over the required minimum of 35 hours in the air, the Wasp accepted her as a trainee in the program. She began training October 4th, 1943, and 6 months later she was flying at Shaw Field in South Carolina. The weather had been mild, with temperatures in the mid-70s, as Jeanne eased her BT-13 into the air, with Maybelle Lyle just moments behind. They were on their way to the Shaw Field testing area, about 15 miles away. They were in constant radio contact, and when they reached the test area, both agreed that their airplanes were flying well. They separated, flying in opposite directions. At 4:15, flying through a clear sky with little wind, Jeanne was heading back to base, flying at 500 feet and entering the landing pattern. Suddenly, the plane rolled over, slammed into the ground, upside down, canopy first. Jeanne never had a chance. Perhaps it was that supposedly repaired heavy wing that had pulled her to the ground. No one could even remember that a Wasp's body had ever received a military escort while going home. Nevertheless, not only did the field commander order an Army officer to escort Jeanne's body to Indiana, the officer was also told to bring along a flag to cover her casket. Jeanne's body arrived in Columbus late in the afternoon on October 19th of 1944. It rested in her father's living room until the next morning. After the closed casket funeral service ended, a procession followed Jeanne to the Garland Brook Cemetery. Edward, still in the Army, received a mere one-day pass to attend her funeral. He would eventually remarry, yet for the rest of his life, Jeanne's photograph and newspaper clippings about her death were always carried with him in his wallet. He died in 1991. A month after Jeanne's funeral, her father received a personal letter from Army Air Force Commander General Henry Hap Arnold.
My dear Mr. Llewellyn, it is with keen regret that I have learned of the untimely death of your daughter, Mrs. Jeanne Norbeck. Word has reached me concerning Mrs. Norbeck, and I find that she entered her country's service with a real desire to use her abilities to advantage for our cause. She took her new responsibilities earnestly, discharging assignments in a worthy manner. She was well-liked and efficient, and you can be genuinely proud of her performance. I hope your sorrow will be alleviated to some extent by the thought that your daughter gave her best in the line of duty. I offer my heartfelt sympathy to you and other members of the family. Very sincerely, H. Arnold, Commanding General, Army Air Forces.
Thanks for watching. Now, there's more ahead about the Wasp and the 38 Women Air Force Service Pilots who died in World War II. So don't forget to subscribe and give us a thumbs up, too, if you would. I want you to have a great day today and an even better tomorrow. Thanks a lot. Bye.